Hey.
Hi. So we've got you. The original Google Plus event wasn't an on-air event, so it was limited to how many people can be in there and how many people can see it and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a good way of organizing it so that we could see who wanted to come and didn't want to come. So I put a link to this there, and
Okay.
I'm gonna put another one there, and then this room should start filling up. And but either way, it's all recorded, so everyone can see it.
Yep.
But um,
I can
and
tweet
then,
about it too if you want.
yeah, that'd be great.
Oh.
All right, people are trickling in, I think. Hey, Wolfgang,
Hey,
good to see you.
good to see you.
Do you want to keep inviting people, or now that the links are posted, should we just start? What do you think? Rich?
Yeah, we should get started. It's 5 after the starting time.
Hey
Okay.
guys, oh, this is Winston. I just realized I was connected to some other Hangout thing that I clicked on the link for, and like there's like a bunch of people in there.
Okay.
So
If you want to share this link with them, then
yeah, I'll do that. Okay, I'll.
jump over. Thanks, Winston.
Yep.
All right, Rich. So I'm gonna open up our Google Doc and just start asking away. And then, do you want to moderate the comments in the Hangout or something?
Sure. I need to find everybody on YouTube, right?
All right, Rich.
It's
So
gonna-
I'm gonna open up our Google Doc and just start. I think you're watching the live feed and it's crossing over. So maybe I should start muting folks.
Find everybody
Um,
on YouTube, right?
There we go. All right, Hadley. I think it's just you and me now.
Okay. Awesome.
At least audio-wise. Audio, video, people are at the bottom, and I have a list of questions, and then I'll open up the chat box on the right, and people can, whoever enters the Hangout can pop those in, and we'll just get started. So, okay, one of my questions was, and this is kind of that revolves around like, there's people like myself who are learning R, and then there's people that are kind of in that middle ground where they understand a lot of the statistics and they're learning the programming of how to apply it. And then there's like the computer science side of this, I feel like, where you're proficient in how to like organize yourself and how you have like a system of, like I just learned at the top of my script now I would like, I'll put like I'll clear my environment maybe, and maybe have a little line that clears my console. So just every time I run it, it'll clear everything up, and then I can start from scratch. But there's little things like that that I feel like there's just so many things that you pick up along the way. Rich, for example, was talking about how he, like, when he updates R, he has like an R profile thing that automatically pulls over all the way he had his settings set up and stuff like that. Wondered if you could talk about maybe what you thought were some of the, just to get started, some of the things that you found useful recently that help you be more productive. Have you started anything new lately?
I mean, one thing that I have been thinking a lot about lately is the per package, and I don't yet have a good way of describing it, but
Per package? Can you?
per
P-U-R-R. Okay.
URRR.
Yeah.
So it's for making it's a functional programming toolkit, basically.
Okay.
And you know, it's one of these problems where sort of after quite a few years of like, struggling with it and thinking about it, it's slowly starting to become more clear to me, you know, that it's solving a useful problem. And so I've started using that a little bit in practice, and it's kind of nice because it helps solve many of these kind of common programming problems that I seem to hit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think otherwise, the other thing I've been trying to do lately is use some of the new keyboard shortcuts in RStudio. So I've been trying to train myself to press, I think it's, I don't even know what it is. I need to try it. I think it's Command-Shift-M, which inserts the pipe symbol. I've been trying to train myself to use that now to save a few keystrokes. And there's Alt minus, which does the assignment arrow. So little things like that, I'm always trying to get better at using RStudio. And you might think like working at RStudio would have some special insight, but most of what I learn is from the RStudio Tips Twitter account.
Okay, oh, that's fun to know. You're a mere mortal. Okay. One of my questions was for RStudio. It seems like you guys have been trickling along in the 3 decimals out of 0.98665 what is there something special in store for 1.0, or is that ever going to get there?
I think we will get there, but basically JJ is a perfectionist and doesn't want to make it a 1.0 until it's really, really solid. So I think there's some kind of pretty exciting stuff coming along in the next release. So I suspect that's going to be RStudio 1.0.
Okay. You released I don't know if it was a package. I remember reading something recently about your for developing packages in R. I think it was a book. Did you have a package with that book?
Yeah. So there's the R packages book, and then there's sort of a set of really 3 packages that come along with it. So DevTools, which generally tries to make a whole lot of common package manipulation problems easy, package development problems easy, and then Roxygen for doing documentation, and TestStat for doing unit tests.
Okay. And what I feel like you're from my perspective of looking in, it seems like you're kind of looking for gaps for our users, and you're trying to fill those gaps. You're trying to fill in the needs to make this more usable, user-friendly for people. And in a way, I imagine that you're probably approaching this in some kind of an organized way. This is what I imagine. What gaps do you still see in R right now?
I don't know if it's that organized. It's probably much less organized than you think it is.
Is it just like on a case-by-case, like you ran into a wall and you were like, I imagine other people run into this wall
too? It's often like sort of an accumulation of small things. Like I kind of notice, hey, this sort of problem or this set of problems seems much harder to solve than it should be. So kind of like purr as an example of that. And in some ways kind of like dplyr is the part of plyr devoted to data frames, and purr is sort of a similar thing but for lists. And so like one of the things I've been thinking about that seems like it's kind of too hard is this case where, you know, you're doing like k-fold cross-validation. You have a whole lot of pairs of test and training data sets, and somehow that kind of seems a little, you know, that seemed a little too painful to work with in my experience. You've got to think really hard about the problem, and you've got to it just seems like you've got to like struggle too much. So purr is one of these things where it's sort of, I've seen all these problems and it's sort of starting to slowly come together in my head, like what a cohesive solution is, what a cohesive set of tools to solve that problem is.
So that kind of leads now into we talked about RStudio and their long drawn out milestones, and now your kind of short-term fixes. And then there's kind of this curiosity about the R group, our developer group in Austria. Like, are you on? How do you interact with them? And how do you see the development of R going with them? How are you involved with that?
So I'm a member of the R Foundation,
Uh-huh.
which is not the group that's in charge of modifying the R source code. That's R core. So
Okay.
R core, I think R core is best understood not as like a group, but as a set of individuals, because by and large, each member kind of works independently on the things that they are interested in. So it doesn't really, I don't think it really makes sense to kind of ask like, what does R core want to achieve with
Okay.
R? Because they're not like a single group. They're a bunch of individuals who are each interested in different things, and some of them, are really active, and some of them were active 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Some of them have moved on to other things. So it's I don't know. So I don't think you can I don't think there's like a plan for R in the future. And I think one of the
Okay.
kind of things that's cool about R as a language is that there isn't that kind of central authority. That most of the innovation in R is happening in the package space, and anyone can contribute to that.
Okay. Um, so I had an interesting conversation with somebody recently. Wolfgang, would you do you remember when we talked about like a comment you made about one of the assumption checks and like how you asked about it online and it seemed like you didn't really hear back? No? Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Not sure what you're referring to.
It was like it was when you were running like maybe it was Cook's D or something. One of the regression assumptions. I think one of the it was assuming that your regression equation was a certain way, and you were like, I asked someone and I didn't really hear back. So I was wondering like who would be the R person that you would talk to if you noticed something like that in R itself? Like for R core, do you contact or who do you?
I think the best thing in cases like that is to send an email to R help, and if the member of R core is interested, will either see that or not.
Okay. Um, so R appeared 22 years ago, according to Wikipedia. And I was wondering, do you foresee any big changes going forward, or is it pretty much the way it is now and just adding new functionality with things like Hadoop or some kind of new technologies? Is it just integrating with those, or do you see any changes in R itself in the near future?
I don't see any changes in R itself in the near future. I think one thing there's sort of two things that have happened recently which I think are really good for the R community. And that is firstly that the R Foundation has sort of come back to life after a hiatus of about 10 years. So the R Foundation, in sort of some broad sense, is the kind of the group of people who worry about R as a language and as a community, and that wasn't very active for a while, and now that's sort of come back to life. And one of the things that the R Foundation did was like update the website and things like that, which clearly have needed to happen for some time. The other thing that I'm really excited about and excited to be part of is this R consortium.
Yeah,
Which
tell
is
us more about that. I saw like Google and Microsoft and a lot of big names were involved with that, but what I couldn't figure out for myself is what are they trying to do?
Yeah, so we're still trying to figure out what we're trying to do too. But I mean, the goal basically is to take like these companies, Google and Microsoft and Oracle and now Studio and so on, are building successful businesses on the back of R. And the goal of the consortium is to give those companies a way to give back to the R community. So one of the things that the R consortium does, is which is how I'm involved, is the infrastructure steering committee. So basically, we are in charge of spending the majority of the money that the R consortium raises on projects that benefit the whole R community. So we recently announced we're funding this R Hub proposal by Gabor Ksadi. That's basically a sort of a modern R Hub, a distributed build system. So if you've got a package on GitHub or wherever, you can easily build it. So you've got binaries to distribute to other people, and you can also check it on all of the major platforms very, very easily. So the R Hub was one of the first it was the first project that the Infrastructure Steering Committee announced, and then we also have an open call for proposals ending in the middle of January. So we're hoping people in the community will come forward with ideas that they would love to work on that would make R better, that a little bit of funding can help make a reality.
Cool. So I got a couple more back to the Hadley questions. Those were more R questions.
Mm-hmm.
What resources do you find you're like, I have a few textbooks that I find myself going back to all the time. What do you find yourself opening all the time?
Somewhat embarrassingly, I think a lot of the times it's my books that I open because I can't remember what I've written.
Okay.
So in particular, like the advanced R, I look stuff up in all of the time because I can never remember how things work. Particularly like if I'm doing things that I don't do very commonly, like particularly writing pure C code, I'm kind of always like have the page open in my browser and looking through it. I think otherwise, like it's just the usual like Google and Stack Overflow. I've found the other thing that I've found quite useful, I've been using a lot more lately, is Winston Chang has a mirror of the R sources on GitHub. So it's a mirror of the SVN where the main development happens, but it's just nice to be able to search through that with GitHub. And often if I'm trying to understand how something in R works, I'll want to read the source code, and that's a great way to get to it.
Cool, thanks. So another one kind of along that line, you talked about your, so you were trained as like a statistician, right?
Mm-hmm.
You went to University of Iowa, and then it seems like you've kind of transitioned into a software developer. Right? How is your career trajectory kind of happening?
I don't know whether I do software development. I don't know if I'd kind of identify as a software developer. I mean, to me, like the three the things that I spend most of my time doing are like programming or software development, kind of like thinking about data and thinking about problems that people have, and then teaching and educating and then giving talks like this. And I think I probably spend like roughly the same amount of time on each of those three things. So programming is a big part of my life, but and definitely like I am interested in like programming and R as a programming language, not just as a vehicle for doing data analysis. But the sort of the data analysis, the data science thing, that's really what drives me.
Okay, so along that lines, one of my next questions was what does your personal research look like? Are you doing your own? Are you a consultant? Do you do university research? Are you working?
No, so I'm full-time at RStudio, and to me, like research is like developing packages.
Okay.
Because it's obviously there's obviously a lot of coding involved in developing a package, but there's also a lot of intellectual effort and just thinking like if you want to solve this class of problems, what are the building blocks? And how do you combine those building blocks together to solve a more complicated problem? So, I spend a lot of time thinking about like how can you decompose a set of similar problems into small steps. And I also spend like a lot of time thinking about what to call things because naming stuff is really important. And coming up with a good name is hard, but it makes all the difference in terms of usability.
Okay. All right, so we're getting close a little bit on time. I wanted to open it up to the community if you have any questions for Hadley. Drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. Chat might be, I don't know, not everybody at once, but if we only have a couple people, then go ahead and ask it yourself. Yeah, okay. You want me to unmute you? Can you unmute yourselves? I don't know how that works.
Just going to go ahead and ask a question.
Okay.
I'm curious. I would say, given the mess that R itself is, what made R so popular? What contributed to its success?
So I think of R as basically being a tremendously pragmatic language. There's not a lot of kind of theoretical purity in the language itself. It's all about like solving problems that people actually have. And in that respect, I think it's very, very similar to PHP in the sense that like lots of people like to rag on PHP as being this kind of nonsense programming language in the same way lots of people like to rag on R for similar reasons. But it succeeded because it helps people solve problems. And I think more than that, there is actually, at the heart of R, this sort of beautiful programming language that it's a little bit it's a little bit like JavaScript, where there's this pretty famous book called JavaScript, the good parts, and you can actually kind of carve out a sort of a subset of JavaScript or a subset of R that is, I think, sort of well-founded and elegant. Most people, a lot of people don't end up writing R code like that. They write R code that just kind of solves problems in the most expedient way possible. But that's also a good thing, that sometimes you just want to solve a problem without kind of thinking about how can you generalize this, or how can you make this as beautiful or as elegant as possible.
Thank you. If nobody else is going to ask questions, I'm going to ask two more. Oh, okay, there we go. I'd love to hear more about multiplier. Down the road, will we see multi-core support better baked into dplyr and also R?
I think the thing that's actually really, really neat about the design of dplyr and multi-dplyr is that it doesn't need to be baked into dplyr. That there's absolutely no advantage to multi-dplyr being inside plyr itself, because dplyr has this idea of backends, and multi-dplyr just provides a new backend. And so I think that's actually a really nice thing about the design of dplyr and the design of multi-dplyr. My sense is that is kind of the right level of abstraction for parallelization. You have to ask the user to say, how can I divide my big problem up into lots of little problems? That you as the user has to do that. If you don't explicitly provide that, that's really, really difficult for the computer to figure out efficient ways of parallelizing your code. But once you've done that, once you've said these are the little subcomponents, it turns out to be pretty easy to write code that parallelizes them. So I hope in the future there's some other work afoot with the DDR, the distributed data structures for R project. I hope multi-dplyr will hook into that at some point, because the goal of that project is to make it so it doesn't just work with these clusters produced by the parallel package, but whenever you're using R in a distributed computing environment, whether it's Hadoop or embedded in SQL Server or whatever, that you could just hook into that and seamlessly make use of that parallelism.
Okay, we've got one other question. Someone just asked. Let's see.
So I think the question is basically the bus number of my projects, which is how many people would need to be hit by a bus before the projects died.
Okay.
That's a good question. I think there are some things, I think for the vast majority of projects, well, a lot of my pet packages suffer benign neglect at the moment, and that doesn't seem to hurt them. A lot of the smaller packages, I think, there's packages like StringR and TestThat and DevTools. There's enough people in the community with the expertise that they could easily, take those over if I was to lose interest. I think things like ggplot2, that's harder, because to understand how ggplot2 works, you need to invest quite a lot of time in reading the code, and the code, although it's slowly getting cleaner over time, ggplot2 was largely written when I didn't know anything about writing R code. So that makes it a little bit harder to dig into.
That leads into, I think you had something you wanted to say about your ggplot2 book. You had a book coming out?
Oh yeah, so ggplot2 book is coming out. Originally, I was planning to release ggplot2 to CRAN today. Unfortunately, that's been a little bit more difficult than I anticipated, and so it won't be coming out to December 11th. But at least early next year, there's going to be a new edition of the ggplot2 book and a new version of the package, which cleans up a lot of small things. The other thing that I've done with ggplot2, mostly because I have kind of moved on from it onto other packages, the next version of ggplot2 has an official extension mechanism, so that if you want to add your own geoms or stats, you can do that in your own package, and it's documented, and people have already started doing that.
Oh, that's cool.
So I think that's definitely, like, as I have matured as a software developer, thinking about sort of succession planning and making packages that are easy for other people to contribute to is pretty important. And and similarly, like, part of the motivation for writing the R packages and the advanced R books was to help foster people who want to become better software developers. Partly sort of, some of it is like completely out of self-interest, that if there are other good software developers, I would have to write as many packages or maintain as many packages, and I'll get more contributions and get more good contributions and that kind of stuff. And I think that's been seeing some of the success of that already. All
right, so I'm gonna put a stamp on it. We're at 6:05, and I know you said you wanted to keep it around about an hour. Do you have 5 more minutes, or do you want to call it?
Yeah, sure. We can do another. I think we've got like another 15 minutes. That would be
fine. So Wolfgang asked a question, and then I have a question as well. Can you read it in the chat box, or do you want me to read it?
So Wolfgang's question is basically, so I think both the sort of a strength and a weakness of R is that it is an incredibly diverse community of people making packages. And now that there's like over, I think, 6,000 packages on CRAN, that's really awesome, because there's a package that does practically anything you can imagine. But now the problem is not that there's one package that does what you want. There's like 5 packages that do what you want. And how do you pick the right one, and how do you kind of get started when you're learning R? Because certainly, like, if you start off learning R, I think, and you kind of if you learn R in the wrong way, if you learn the wrong packages to get started, your life is going to be much, much harder than it could be. I think kind of solving that problem is difficult. I think it's sort of hard, I think, for the R Foundation to say, like, these are the best packages. I think basically the problem is that you can't really say, like, this is the best package. You can say this is the best package given this set of constraints. And people have different constraints and are highly opinionated about which constraints are important. And obviously I've designed a set of packages that all work together really well, and I personally believe that your life is going to be easier learning R if you use those packages. But like, I'm absolutely happy to say that as me as an individual. But for like the R Foundation to come out and say that just doesn't seem like quite right. I think it's just one of these problems, like, Crantastic, the goal of Crantastic was to make this more community driven so people could vote on packages, but then there's always this sort of chicken and the egg problem of how do you get people to go and vote on packages if no one's voted there. And I don't know, it's a really hard problem. And the thing I don't quite understand, or I think I think there's some important difference between the R community and, say, the Python community, because I don't hear people kind of complain about this so much in the Python community, which has maybe like 5 or 10 times as many packages. So I don't know whether that's just kind of software developers are used to this thing where you're going to have, like, there's 5 possible fundamentally different approaches you could use to solve a problem, and one of those packages is going to be like from 10 years ago and hasn't been updated for 5 years, and one of them is going to be like have a whole flurry of activity on GitHub, but it's only 3 months old, and Another one's been written by someone really famous, but it doesn't seem to be very good quality. So I don't know. I think there's absolutely our community should be able to do better at this, especially given that our forte is supposed to be making sense out of data. But I kind of don't know how to resolve it. I mean, my kind of hope is that someone will write a proposal to the R consortium, and I'll be like, oh, that's so obvious. That's absolutely the right way to solve this problem, and then we'll give them the money, and then they'll solve it. But I suspect it's actually sort of an intractably hard problem.
Okay. So, quick question I had was, what do you think about the future of computing? Of data analysis on personal computers as the potential for cloud-based analysis as prices for cloud-based computing goes down. It seems like for large data, that might become something that people want to do is use R in the cloud for this giant data set because it runs way faster. It's already set up to use 20 cores, and I have a PC with 4 cores maybe or something.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two main challenges. I mean, firstly, like when you've got lots of data, moving it around is expensive. So if the data is currently sitting on your desktop and it's big data, which means it's like a couple
Multiple
of terabytes,
gigabytes.
or gigabytes, just getting that up to the cloud is going to take some time and be moderately painful.
Yeah, I'm thinking like 10 years from now when everybody has Google Fiber. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I suspect that in that case, like the size of the data that you can, like kind of everything is growing. The size of data you can handle on your desktop is increasing. The network speeds are hopefully increasing. I think the availability of compute resources in the cloud is growing, and what ends up being most effective, sort of ends up as some like fine balance between. It all depends on the balance of those factors, whether it's going to make more sense to do data analysis locally or on the cloud. And I think it's still too kind of early to predict. The other problem is, a lot of companies are just not going to let their large data sets out into the cloud. Like, I think that problem of it's kind of hard enough to keep the data secure when everything that it lives on is owned and controlled by you, but now you want to kind of give your data off into the hands of someone else. That's sort of a challenging problem. And some companies are just afraid of it because it's new and it's different, but there are like legitimate concerns. And certainly it's kind of, I don't know, on some level, like for a company like Google, which basically makes most of its money by taking your personal information and selling it to advertisers, and now like it has to have sort of this. If it ever did that with the Google Compute Cloud, if it kind of ever looked at the data you were analyzing, that would be I would imagine a huge disaster. So how do you kind of reconcile like two parts of a company, one which has to keep data incredibly secure, and another part of that company which is all about, in essence, giving people free services so it can get your data for free? Like that sort of seems like a interesting tension to me.
It is. Okay, anything else from the community? I've asked my couple questions.
Hey, I'd like to ask a question.
Sure. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Hadley, how are you?
Good.
So, you probably have seen like my daughter sort of walking around. Just out of curiosity, like, have you ever talked to like educational institutions or trying to get kids more involved in data analysis? And I just kind of thought about this since Samantha was here. And
not really. I mean, I think one country that I think is doing particularly well at this is New Zealand. Partly because it's a small country, and I think partly because the statistics community there is really well plugged into the Department of Education. And so I think, certainly in New Zealand, like, statistics, you actually, like, in the US, there seems to be, I don't quite understand how the math courses break down, but it seems to be kind of like algebra and geometry and stuff like that. In New Zealand, the main breakdown is kind of statistics and calculus. So a lot of people take statistics in high school, and it's absolutely part of like the curriculum, even for lower level math classes. And there's some pretty nice stuff that with a sort of start very early on, like in I don't know, like fifth or sixth grade, with statistics activities that are like concrete resampling based activities, where you actually have like a jar of things and you shake them around and you pull them out and you put them back in and you try it out, and then over time that curriculum builds up to using computer-based simulations, and I think they're using R for that and starting to look into using Shiny and stuff. It's pretty cool.
Thanks. And one more quick question. I wrote my first bar package using your book, so thank you.
Awesome.
And what I'm having trouble with is just kind of understanding how to write tests, and I'm wondering if you have good advice or better examples in the book about like writing tests for developing your packages.
No, basically, writing tests is really, really hard, and I think I can do like a reasonably good job of it now, but I'm still not that great, and I sort of don't know how to explain it terribly well to other people. I mean, to me, the main thing is you want to like think about like what are the high risk parts of your code? What are the places where you think you might have made a mistake? And then kind of like double entry bookkeeping. Basically what you're doing is just checking you're working in a different way and seeing if the results line up. And so that's sort of the way I think about it. Sometimes I write lots of tests and just seems to happen very naturally. Other times I like make a small change and like lots of tests break, and I'm like, oh, I really didn't do a very good job of designing these tests, and it's frustrating, and I don't write so many tests for a while. So I don't know. I think they're useful. They're definitely more work, and I think the best way to get started with them is to really think about like any parts of your, often I'll be writing a function, I'm like, well, I think I understood what I've just done then, but I'm not really sure, and I'm not sure if this will work on these edge cases. So when you're writing the function, you'll try stuff out interactively in the console to see if it does what you expect.
Right.
And the main aim of unit testing is just to take those things you're doing informally and automate them and make them so that they run all the time and easily. And I think the best way to do that is to think about like wherever you're likely to have made a mistake.
Thanks.
All right, one more question from Wolfgang, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. His is in the text chat box.
So his disclaimer is that it's after midnight and he has had a glass of red wine, but do you feel that RCore or people closely associated with it are somehow antagonistic towards RStudio and or your work? I would say kind of yes, with the caveat that some of them are antagonistic to everyone's work, regardless of what it is. So I think I think that there's just a lot of people on RCore by and large are very senior, very well-known academics, and they have very strong opinions about things, and they are very happy to freely express those opinions. And that's just, for better or for worse, that's part of the R community.
Great. Okay, so you talked about the R consortium. You talked about some resources, like things that you turn to, your own books. Is there any sort of blog or anything or feed burner that you use to keep up with new stuff? Twitter seems to be something you use.
I mean, I follow the RSAT hashtag on Twitter, and I read a lot of R-related blogs. I use the old Reader. I don't know, like I follow like 300 blogs or something, so that's how I kind of keep track of what's interesting and new stuff that's going on.
Cool. Well, I thank you for all your time. You went over the time we requested, and I appreciate you answering questions. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Great. Thanks for having me. Bye.